to order. Good afternoon, everyone. It is January 22nd, 2018, regular meeting of the Board of Water Supply. First up on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held on December 18, 2017. Can I entertain a motion for?
So move.
Okay, move. Seconded. Is there any discussion, corrections to the minutes of December 18, 2017? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Okay, next one. We did have a special meeting, a water rates workshop held on January 5th, 2018, and the minutes have been distributed. I hope you've reviewed them. There was quite a lot of material during that meeting. May I entertain a motion for approval? Okay, it's been moved. Any second? Seconded. Any discussion regarding the minutes of the water rates workshop that was held on January 5th, 2018? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. Okay, next one is the adoption of resolution number 882, 2018, for the acceptance of a gift to the Board of Water Supply from Mrs. George Ewan in honor of George Ewan. Manager Lau?
Thank you, Chair Andaya. I'd just like to recognize that Mr. Ewan was the third manager. If you look up on the wall here, is third manager of the Board of Water Supply since it was created back in 1929. Mr. Ewan was a great manager and chief engineer of the Board of Water Supply, rose from the ranks of being an engineer. I'd like to request that this item, this resolution be deferred. There's been maybe perhaps a reconsideration of the donation to the board, so should that come up again, we'd like to bring it back to the board at a future meeting. But for today, I'd like to request that the board defer this item on the agenda.
Okay, the item is deferred until further action, or do we need a motion to defer this? No? Okay, we're standing deferred.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next item. This is for the adoption of resolution number 883, 2018, recommending to the City Council, City and County of Honolulu, the disposal via negotiated sale of surplus real property and certain real property interests. Manager Lau?
Thank you, Chair. This relates to our Sunset Beach Well and Sunset Beach Reservoir, 206 Reservoir. I'd like to, Mr. Mike Matsuo, head of our land division, to provide the report. This has come up previously before the board. The facilities are no longer needed, and we're looking at disposing of both facilities. Mike, please take it away.
Good afternoon, Chair and board members. My name is Michael Matsuo. I'm the head of the land division here at Board of Water Supply. We are recommending adoption of resolution number 883-2018, which recommends to the City Council of City and County of Honolulu the disposal via negotiated sale of the subject surplus Sunset Beach Well and Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir real property and certain real property interests to Bob's Paumalu LLC, provided that the new Sunset Beach Well access easement is designated and approved. What you see up before you on the screen is a map of the real property and real property interests that the Board of Water Supply was, obtained. It's a little hard to see. Hope you have it in your packet as well, but we have two lots. One is a lot number 2, which is 0.124 acres, and lot 3, which is 0.689 acres. We also have 4 easements that provide access and pipeline accessibility. We have easement A, easement C, easement D, and easement E. Let me give you some background on this real property. The Sunset Beach Well was developed in 1948 and had a yield of approximately 0.06 million gallons per day. The well was intended to supplement the Waiale'e 1 and 2 wells to adequately serve the area from Waiale'e to Kawela. In 1960, we acquired the title to those two lots, lots 2 and number 3, and non-exclusive rights in the nature of easements for road and pipeline purposes over those easements A, C, D, and E. And those were all obtained from Hawaiian Pineapple Company Limited. Lot 2 became the site of the Sunset Beach well, and Lot 3 became the site of the Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir, which is a 300,000-gallon storage reservoir with a spillway elevation of 206 feet. Easements A and E was for access to Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir. Easement D was for the pipeline and access between the Sunset Beach well and the reservoir. And easement C was for access from Kamehameha Highway to Sunset Beach well, and also for the connecting pipeline from the well down to the Border Water Supply system on Kamehameha Highway. As you can see, the map is there on the screen. In 1984, the Sunset Beach well was shut down due to water quality issues. In 1990, we implemented a capital improvement project to replace the existing pump and renovate the existing well station. Unfortunately, after several months of flushing and water quality testing, the well was not placed back into service due to ongoing bacterial presence, which is possibly due to many cesspools in the area and possible surface water influence. At around the same time, it was decided to pursue the development of Opana wells, which is to the north of Sunset Beach well. In 2012, the Opana wells were completed and conveyed to Border Water Supply by the Turtle Bay Resorts. And the Opana wells now currently provides Border Water Supply with approximately 0.3 million gallons a day of potable water. At approximately the same time, Border Water Supply Water Systems Operations Division was able to bring the 2 million gallon Kawela 228 reservoir back online. It should be noted that the Waiale'e to Kawela system operates at a spillway elevation of 228 feet. With a spillway elevation of 206 feet, the Sunset Beach Reservoir is incompatible with the current system serving the Waiale'e to Kawela water system. Thus, the disposal of both facilities will not affect our ability to provide adequate water service to the community or our operations in the area. City and state agencies were contacted and indicated that they have no interest in acquiring either the well or the reservoir and any other improvements on site. Thus, the board approved the disposal of this surplus real property and real property interests for both the well and the reservoir at its June 22nd, 2015 meeting. BWS, we commissioned an appraisal of the surplus real property and real property interest, and this includes all improvements to both the well site and the reservoir. So all the well, the pumps, the controls, the tank, whatever utilities we have on site. And the total appraised value came out to $99,000. Bob's Pamalu LLC, who owns the property which surrounds the Sunset Beach well and Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir, has expressed an interest in acquiring both the well and the reservoir, plus the easements for agricultural use. We've been under negotiations with Bob's Palmalu, and they have agreed to purchase the surplus BWS real property and certain real property interests, specifically only easements D and E. And the total cost for that would be the total sales price is $82,495.13. The sale of the surplus of the well site and all the easements, however, of the two easements, is contingent on the designation and approval of a new access easement to the Sunset Beach well. It might be a little hard to see, but the easement C that provides access to the well from Kamehameha Highway actually crosses over like 4 or 5 different properties. So when we initially obtained that easement, the subdivision along Kamehameha Highway wasn't developed at the time. So the easement was within a bigger parcel. But once they did all the subdivision, our easement ended up in 4 different parcels, including Bob's Palmalu's parcel. But what we are currently proposing is that we are going to create a new access easement to the well, which will be completely within Bob's Palmalu's parcel. Their parcel, there's a stem to their parcel that goes all the way down to Kamehameha Highway, so we're basically going to realign the easement into that stem. So with Bob Palmalu's permission and authorization to act as their agent. We did submit an application to designate the new access easement to the City Department of Planning and Permitting, and we've already been granted tentative approval. We complied with their requirements for the tentative approval, so we are anticipating to get final approval shortly. The next step will be to petition the Land Court of the State of Hawaii to designate and approve the access easement. However, we anticipate that this will take some time as Land Court is a little backlogged at the moment. So at this time, we are requesting that the board recommend to the City Council, as required by charter, the disposal via negotiated sale to Bob's Palmalu, with the condition that the disposal be contingent on the official designation and approval of the new access easement to Sunset Beach Well. So if I can read the actual resolution. Resolution number 883-2018, recommending to the City Council, City and County of Honolulu, the disposal via negotiated sale of surplus real property and certain real property interests for Sunset Beach Well and Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir to Bob's Palmalu LLC, provided the new access easement to Sunset Beach Well is designated and approved. Whereas Hawaiian Pineapple Company Limited, a Hawaii corporation, conveyed to the City and County of Honolulu those certain real property situate at Palmalu, Ko'olauloa, Oahu, Hawaii, described as Lot 2, area 0.12 acres, and Lot 3, area 0.689 acres, described in owner's transfer certificate of title number 8507, dated July 8, 1960, and bearing tax map keys 596 parcel 10 and 596 parcel 9, respectively, for the use of the Board of Water Supply, and real property interests in the form of non-exclusive rights in the nature of an easement for road purposes over and along easement A and easement E, and for road and pipeline purposes over and along easement C and easement D, and for road and pipeline purposes over and along, that was easement C and D, to be exercised and enjoyed by the Board of Water Supply by that certain recorded indenture filed with the Office of the Assistant Registrar of the Land Court, State of Hawaii, as document number 259548, dated May 27, 1960. And whereas easement A provides access to Lot 3 from a private road, easement E provides access to Lot 3 from easement A, easement C provides access to Lot 2 over, across, and through several privately owned real properties, and easement D provides access to Lot 3 from Lot 2. And whereas the Board of Water Supply constructed a well, control building, piping, valves, pumps, controls, treatment equipment, electrical utilities, and drainage improvements, hereinafter collectively the Sunset Beach Well, on Lot 2, and a 300,000-gallon concrete storage tank, piping, valving, drainage improvements, telemetry equipment, and electrical utilities, collectively known as the Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir, on Lot 3 to provide water service to the area from Waiale'e to Kawela. And whereas BWS abandoned the Sunset Beach Well due to water quality issues, and the Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir because it is no longer compatible with the water system that is currently serving the Waiale'e Kawela area, which is operating at a higher spillway elevation than the Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir, and declared them as surplus. And whereas the Board of Water Supply approved the disposal of the surplus real property and real property interests for both facilities at its June 22nd, 2015 meeting, and whereas Bob's Palmalu LLC, owner of the surrounding real property bearing tax map key 596, parcel 33, expressed an interest in acquiring the surplus real property and real property interests for Sunset Beach Well and Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir for agricultural purposes, whereas Bob's Palmalu LLC agreed to allow Board of Water Supply to designate a new access easement to Lot 2 that would be located completely in its property, whereas the newly designated access easement to Lot 2 would eliminate the need to use easement C to access Lot 2, and whereas after negotiations with the Board of Water Supply, Bob's Palmalu LLC agreed to purchase the surplus real property and certain real property interests, specifically easements D and E, for Sunset Beach Well and Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir for $82,495.13. And whereas Bob's Palmalu LLC understood and agreed that the sale of the surplus real property and certain real property interests for Sunset Beach Well and Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir will be contingent not only on the approval of the City Council, City and County of Honolulu, but also on the designation and approval of the new access easement to Lot 2. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the members of the Board of Waspli, City and County of Honolulu, that the Board of Waspli recommends to the City Council, City and County of Honolulu, the disposal via negotiated sale of the surplus real property and certain real property interests for the Sunset Beach Well and Sunset Beach 206 Reservoir to Bob's Palmalu LLC, provided that the new access easement to Sunset Beach Well is designated and approved.
All right.
Also suggest, maybe one correction, Mike, on the first paragraph, the Lot 3 area is actually stated currently as 0689. It should be 0.689. Is that correct? If I could request the board approve the amendment or the correction there.
Noted. On the first page of resolution number 883, 2018, first paragraph of the body where the description of the real property described as Lot 2, area 0.124 or 124 hundredths of an acre, and Lot 3 should be 0.689 or 689 hundredths of an acre, is corrected. Do I hear a motion to approve? Any second? Is there any discussion? Any questions for Mr. Matsuo? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, resolution is adopted with that correction. Okay, moving right along, we are going to our items for information. First is the financial statements and supplemental information with the independent auditor's report for the fiscal years ended June 30th, 2017 and 2016.
Thank you, Chair. We have NNK CPAs, Inc. Here, our auditors here to make a presentation to the board. The financial statements and supplemental information with the independent auditor's report for FY ending June 30th, 2017 and 16. Mahalo. Please introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon, Board Chair and members of the board. My name is Lawrence Chu. I'm a principal with NNK CPAs Inc., and I'm the principal and responsible for your audit. And with me this afternoon is Ryan Iwane, one of our senior managers. Okay, the scope of our work was we're engaged to perform an audit of the financial statements as of and for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2017, and also to form an opinion on the compliance requirements with respect to the federal programs, what's also known as a single audit. And our audit was performed in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America, and also the standards applicable to financial audits contained in government auditing standards, and also the requirements in the uniform guidance. This slide shows a summary of our auditor's results. With respect to the financial statements, we issued an unmodified opinion. There were no material weaknesses identified in internal control over financial reporting, and there were none reported with respect to significant deficiencies. And there are also no non-compliance material to the financial statements noted. With respect to the single audit, the federal awards, internal control over compliance over the major federal programs, there were no material weaknesses identified, and also significant deficiencies, there were none reported. We also issued an unmodified opinion with respect to compliance with major federal awards, and there were no findings that were required to be reported. The major federal program we looked at was the capitalization grant for drinking water, the state revolving fund. The dollar threshold between what is a type A and B program was $750,000, and the Board of Water Supply qualified as a low-risk auditee. So there were no matters reported with respect to financial statement findings, and also no matters reported over the federal awards on the compliance side. And then with that, I'll let Ryan cover the remaining slides.
Thanks, Lawrence. My name is Ryan Iwane. I'm a senior manager with NNK CPAs. As Lawrence mentioned, the 2017 audit was a very clean audit. It was very good. The results were very good for the Board of Water Supply. If some of you might recall from 2016, we did actually identify one internal control finding that we considered to be a significant deficiency over internal control, over financial reporting. And that finding was related to the accounting for significant non-routine transactions. In this case, the non-routine transactions was a bond refunding that occurred back in fiscal year 2015, as well as a principal forgiveness related to some of the SRF loans. So the condition that we identified back in the prior year audit was that the 2015 financial statements of the Board of Water Supply were restated to correct errors for the deferred loss on refunding of debt and state refunding fund note payable. Our recommendation in the prior year was that management should proactively identify significant non-routine transactions and be actively involved in both the determination of the proper accounting treatment as well as a timely review of the recorded transactions. Based on audit procedures performed in the current year's audit, we believe that management has sufficiently addressed this issue, and therefore we consider this finding to be closed. Does anybody have any questions on the status of the prior audit's findings? So the last thing we wanted to discuss with the board today is required communication with those charged with governance at the conclusion of the audit. I believe our letter to the board of directors is included in the board material that was provided to you for this meeting. For the most part, the topics that need to be included in this communication are fairly standardized by U.S. audit standards. Give a brief summary of some of those topics. Our auditor's views of the Board of Water Supply's significant accounting policies used, the sensitive accounting estimates, and financial statement disclosures, any disagreements with management or significant difficulties encountered during the audit, and any material corrected misstatements or uncorrected misstatements identified during the course of the audit, and any other findings or other issues that we came across. And so, the letter that we issue to you, for the most part, is fairly uneventful, which is a good thing. There is one issue, though, that we wanted to bring to your attention, and that was the adoption of a new accounting principle effective for fiscal year 2017. This new accounting principle, which is GASB statement number 82, pertains to the accounting for pension, and it clarifies certain guidance that came about several years back. I think it was GASB statement number 68, sorry. The requirements of this statement apply to financial reports of all state and local governmental entities, and it resulted in the reclassification of payments made by the Board of Water Supply to satisfy certain employee pension contribution requirements that were previously deferred in the period for which contributions were assessed and recorded as expenses in the subsequent fiscal year. These changes have been applied retroactively by restating the financial statements of the Board of Water Supply as of June 30, 2016, so that the fiscal year 16 presentation is comparable to the 2017 presentation. The change resulted in a reduction of beginning net position as of July 1, 2015 by approximately $1.7 million. It reduced the change in net position for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2016 by about $96,000. And as of June 30, 2016, deferred outflows of resources, and ending net position both decreased by approximately $1.8 million. The change impacted fiscal year 17 by decreasing the change in net position by approximately $126,000. So as you can see, this adoption of a new accounting principle didn't result in a huge impact to the Board of Water Supply's financial statements. Nonetheless, it did have a small impact, and so we wanted to bring that to your attention. Does anybody have any questions on the adoption of the new accounting principle or any information included in our communication letter to you?
Members, any questions?
Okay, that's all that we have for today. So I'd like to thank the board for this opportunity to meet with you. Also like to thank the manager and their staff and all the help and coordination during this audit process. Thank you.
We also appreciate the work of our auditors and CPAs. Good job, gentlemen.
Thanks. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving right along here, the next item we have is an update on our financial plan and rate study update.
Mahalo, Chair. We have Joe Cooper, our Waterworks Controller, and also Mr. David Ebersol from CDM Smith, who's working on the master plan project and the financial plan and rates. Joe?
Good afternoon, Chair Andaya, board members. I'm going to present the update on our financial planning process. Feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentation if you would like. First, I'd like to kind of give you a brief overview of our financial planning process. It's kind of part of a larger vision of, or a planning process. It includes our vision statement, our mission statement, our strategic plans, our water master plan. And these are all kind of related and support each other. And a key component of doing this and developing these plans is obviously the financial plan that goes hand in hand with them. I'm going to skip down a little bit to the fourth item here on the financial policies to bring to your attention that back in May, the board adopted 4 financial policies to help us guide us in our financial planning. Briefly, those are to maintain a working capital or cash on hand of a minimum of 60 days of operating funds with a target of 180 days. The second policy was to have a debt service coverage ratio for senior debt of 1.6 and an all-in coverage ratio of 1.7. Excuse me, I got those wrong. The senior debt is 1.7 and the all-in coverage is 1.6. We have a debt to net asset ratio of 50% or less, meaning we shouldn't borrow more than 50% of our total assets. And finally, the purpose of our debt is that long-term debt should be used to finance long-term assets, and short-term debt may be used to finance the cash flow for emergencies. The second part of our financial plan is our capital expenditures. We have a 30-year capital. We have actually several capital improvement plans that go out 30 years. We do a 10-year capital improvement plan. We do a 6-year capital improvement plan. And finally, we do a 1-year capital improvement plan. So this is to try to give us a long-range vision, and as we get closer and closer to implementation, those models are refined. So this slide shows a 30-year, full 30-year capital improvement plan. Like I said, we have a 10-year financial model, which is highlighted in green. And then finally, the same model is used in our 5-year rate development plan. As you can see, the majority of this plan is the brown, which is the repair and replacement of pipelines. As adopted by the board, we decided to, the board adopted to pursue what is known as PL2, which is the goal of replacing 21 miles of pipeline a year. The second part of our financial plan is to budget our operating expenses. And in doing this, we start with our budgeted amount. And We applied our historical perspective and reduced for planning purposes, have actually taken about 85% of our normal operating budget for our financial plan, and that is to avoid us from trying to overstate or over-collect revenues in this plan. Again, this reflects a 10-year time horizon from a current amount of about $137 million a year to $197 million in 10 years. And it shows kind of the breakdown between the four major components of our operating plan. To account for some unexpected or unanticipated issues in implementing our capital improvement plan, we have a thin red line at the top called the CIP implementation allowance. This is some additional amounts that may be needed for contract management going forward. On top of this, we build the revenue requirement, which helps define how much revenue we're going to need or how much money we need to develop our, to fulfill our operating costs and capital improvements. And so we start by building the operating and maintenance cost budget. We add the capital improvement cost budget, and then we try to apply different bond and financing strategies to help reduce that amount, to reduce the amount, to help smooth out the peaks and valleys of both of these budgets, and to reduce the amount of money we have to collect from our rate holders.
You should have the numbers listed on the side, huh? The amount of revenue.
The numbers listed on the side here, yes. The numbers are not listed on the side. I think, what can I go back to? This is kind of, yeah, the operating fund. So this would be the operating fund, or the operating and maintenance would be the bottom part of that graph that I showed you earlier. And then the capital improvement, that would be taking the 10-year model of the capital improvement plan on this. And this is where, yeah, we listed the numbers on that. But yeah, it wasn't, you're correct, it wasn't on that graph.
Yeah, we can take a look at that other graph that shows operating capital and financing strategy and try to put some numbers on there to give folks an idea of the magnitude of the budgets.
We'll correct that on future presentations. Like I said, we build the revenue requirement, and then we use financing to help hold down the cost and spread the costs out over the future years. That gives us, and there's numbers on this graph, but it's a little hard to read. I mean, it gives us our revenue requirement. We have a spike up in 2019, 20, and then it comes down, and you can see that the revenue requirement rises slowly over the next 10 years. With no adjustments to the revenue, it would, the revenue that we have would be flat. So, and in general, we expect this revenue requirement to rise from about, I don't know, $230 million a year to $330 million over the next 10 years. Like I said, but over the 5-year planning horizon, the revenue requirement is expected to rise in general about 12.5%. Are there any questions or comments? This takes us through the first 5 chapters in the first 10 years of our financial plan. We have the 6th chapter, which is actually to address the next 20 years beyond 10. So this is our 30-year financial plan to address the scenarios and the obstacles that we may encounter in the future. And to have that presentation, I will introduce Dave Eversold from CDM Smith, our consultant. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Joe, Chair Andaya, members of the board. So as Joe explained, this is the 10-year revenue requirement, and the detailed numbers you were asking about in there, I believe, were presented at a board update either last month or the month prior. So you do have that information available, and we can certainly provide it again. Now Joe presented the first 10 years, a recap of the first 10 years, and what the long-range financial plan does is actually look out for a period of 30 years. And so wanted to review a few of the assumptions that were generated or used in extending that 10-year forecast out to looking at a 30-year period. A couple of things to highlight in here. There's a lot of numbers in here, but important ones. Joe talked about the debt to cash, the financing strategy. So through the 30-year period, overall, it's a 50% debt to cash ratio. And the O&M escalations are assumed to be 3.5% per year, which is a continuation of the trend from the detailed financial modeling. Keeping in mind the days of working capital in your financial policies of targeting 180 days of working capital. And then another key point is the water demand forecast. This begins with the Water Master Plan itself. We assume then about half the growth rate in there because, again, as Joe explained, just like we don't want to overestimate the need for revenues to fund operations and maintenance expenses, neither do we want to assume more water sales than might actually occur. So we go a little conservative there. When you take into account a 0.1% per year growth in customers, also on top of that, the Board of Water Supply's conservation goals, a 5-year reduction in gallons per capita per day, the long-term water demand forecast is essentially flat. That becomes important to understand because that means that without any revenue adjustments, revenues going forward would be essentially flat. So what we look at here then is Joe showed you the 10-year period, and what we're doing now is extending out the trends with the dashed lines. The revenue trend requirement in the top blue line is what's projected to happen out into the future, going out to the year 2048. And without any revenue adjustments, you can see there's a pretty big gap that happens in between these two things. So what are the revenue requirements, the adjustments to revenue requirement necessary to fill that gap? It looks something like this. You've seen this smoothing example. This first 10 years is what we showed in the smoothing example for the 10-year revenue requirement a couple of updates ago. It looks a little, and Joe just reviewed it also, it looks a little steeper here because we've put more years into the time period, and so it escalates the scale of it. But it's the same thing you just saw in a previous slide, and then going out into the future, it shows the trend of anticipated revenue adjustments. So ranging between about 4.5% and 6% per year out for years 10 through 30. Now, what we did then was to look at a number of different scenarios, because anytime we look out that far in advance, there's a number of uncertainties that need to be considered. And those are things like uncertainties in water demand or water quality or economic factors or regulatory requirements and so forth. So we put together a number of scenarios to capture different combinations of these uncertainties. Those scenarios included aggressive conservation, aggressive growth, a major natural disaster, major source water contamination, climate change, and economic cycles. And I'd like to briefly walk through the trend analysis from each of these. So looking at aggressive conservation, what we assumed here is that the per capita demand decreases are at 1% per year, which is quite a high number, and that it's an across-the-board drop amongst all your customers. So there's not an expectation that only your high users can serve, but rather that it happens across the board. In that situation, what happens is that the revenues, the long-term revenue trends, there's actually less sales than there are currently. So in all these comparisons, I'm going to do the green line is going to stay the same. The blue line, the dark blue line up at the top is going to stay the same, and we're going to make comparisons to those two lines. So with aggressive conservation and decreases of about 1% per year, the revenue trend goes down, which means that The gap between the bottom and the top is bigger. So there are additional adjustments to revenue that are necessary in the event of aggressive conservation. And so instead of seeing trends out into the future ranging between 4.5% and 6%, you can see that across the board, those revenue adjustments would be a couple percent per year higher. So what are the different financial mitigation strategies that are available? And across the board, we looked at 5 different strategies. Some are short-term and some are longer-term. Accessing working capital, that 180 days cash, is a short-term strategy. Deferring expenses is similarly a short-term strategy. Raising or restructuring rates, issuing debt, and taking advantage of public-private partnerships are all longer-term strategies. So since aggressive conservation is a relatively long-term phenomenon, it's anticipated that you would have some deferral of expenses, for example, growth-related investments, but it would likely be necessary to raise or restructure rates or have a greater reliance on debt issuance to address this type of a scenario. Looking then at the other side of the spectrum, what happens in the event of aggressive growth? And we looked at 2 different alternatives here. The first is consistent with what the Water Master Plan refers to as the high-range demand forecast. And you can see the details of it shown in item 1. And then we thought, well, why don't we go even a little more aggressive than that and assume 1% per year growth in usage. Now, there would be some expected increases in operations and maintenance costs, and we assume that those are offset by additional rate-based revenue. If your sales are growing, you're going to have more revenue coming in. And so that's actually what we see in this slide. Keep in mind the dark blue line at the top is the same, and the light green line at the bottom is the same. So with greater revenues coming in, the light blue line shows those higher amounts of revenue, and as a result, there's less revenue adjustments that are necessary in the future. The same thing happens when we look at the aggressive growth number at 1% annual rate. The gap becomes even smaller. So here, in the baseline scenario, in the dark green, that's what we've seen previously with some with the Water Master Plan high-range growth. There are lower revenue adjustments that are necessary, and when we go up to the 1% amount of growth, due to those increasing revenues, you need even less revenue adjustments out into the future. So in this instance, there may be the need to access working capital in the short run to build some growth-related facilities. Those costs would likely be reimbursed over time through your water system facilities charge. May also look at raising restructuring rates, issuing debt for the construction of those facilities, or leveraging public-private partnerships, say for the construction of a new source sooner than you might need it, those types of events. For a major natural disaster, the issue here is that we've assumed that there's damage to infrastructure that causes additional capital needs, and that there's a revenue loss due to water service interruption or reductions in rate collection. And so over the first year following an event, we sampled a number of different water utilities financial statements who had been subject to major natural disasters, like from Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Iniki. And we see that the damage as a percent of net assets ranged between 1.3 and 4.8%, and revenue losses ranged from 1.9 to 24% in the first year. So we evaluated a number of different scenarios. These scenarios you've actually seen, I believe, before, prior to adoption of the financial policies back in May, because they were part of the evaluation for that process. But what the disaster recoveries show is that the total amount of days cash needed in these different scenarios ranged from a little under 180 to a little over 200, depending on which combination of damage and revenue losses were specifically evaluated. So the financial mitigation strategies that would be used in this type of a situation would be accessing working capital, deferring expenses, non-essential capital projects while you're performing necessary repairs, maybe the need to issue some additional debt to fund some of those capital projects, and then certainly the opportunity to leverage public-private partnerships for any specialized work or places where it would exceed the board's baseline level of resourcing. Then we looked at a major source water contamination. This is a generic example. It's nothing more than an example. We assumed that there was about a 10 MGD water source that was impacted. It could be either from a sudden leak or long-term legacy land use. And we further assume that the contamination will persist into the long term. Some potential costs that could result from this: to develop a new 10 MGD source with a mile of 36-inch pipeline, maybe something on the order of $85 million in capital costs and annual O&M costs on the order of $500,000. If there was a long stretch of pipeline that was necessary, say 36 inches, that might look like $125 million and a little over $1 million in annual O&M costs. Or installing 10 million gallons per day of treatment might have a price tag around $30 million with annual O&M costs around $3 million. These are very rough estimates and not intended to represent any particular situation, but just give us a basis for an analysis. So in this type of event, what are the financial strategies here? You could actually go across the board. All of these strategies may be applicable depending on the severity of the event. So might be short-term accessing working capital for some smaller capital expenses, or the need to issue debt or enter into public-private partnerships were there the necessity for complex treatment or extended operations and maintenance. Next scenario we looked at is climate change. And here our assumptions are that there is a higher capital replacement need due to increased groundwater salinity. We assumed that 25% of the infrastructure is low enough and close enough to the coast to be impacted by that high salinity, and therefore the useful life of that impacted infrastructure will be cut in about half. So additionally, additional sources of water would be needed to replace failing groundwater sources, those that would be impacted by high salinity. And there may be the need to require mandatory conservation as a result of decreased supplies. So this is a bit of a complicated graph, but again, the light green line, the revenue trend with no adjustments, and the dark blue line at the top are the same as they've always been. So with the need to construct additional facilities, the revenue requirement at the top goes up, and that may also be associated with increased operations and maintenance costs. At the same time, as a potential result of needing to have mandatory conservation or encourage more conservation, we also see a decrease in revenues like you saw in the aggressive conservation scenario. So here, getting hit on both ends of the spectrum, and not surprisingly, the required revenue adjustments in this scenario are substantially greater than the baseline scenario, with adjustments going as high as 8% per year. So in that situation, the mitigation strategies available, just about everything except the deferral of expenses. Again, that's a short-term fix to what really here is a long-term problem, so perhaps not the most appropriate solution, but all these other things, accessing working capital, raising or restructuring rates, issuing debt, and public-private partnerships are all certainly viable. The BWS has a number of important plans to aggressively track and deal with climate change adaptation. Here are a few of them. The Hawaii Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission. BWS also participates in the City Climate Change Sustainability and Resiliency Office's efforts and is part of the City Resilience Team. They are participating in research on climate change modeling forecasts by UH Manoa. participating in Water Research Foundation studies assessing infrastructural vulnerability to climate change, some specific modeling being done on the Pearl Harbor Honolulu groundwater system to understand groundwater quantity and quality changes that might be anticipated, the individual Ahupua'a management plans, and then also looking at some specific project opportunities like stormwater capture from Nu'uana Reservoir to supplement aquifer recharge. The last scenario we evaluated was an economic downturn, and unfortunately, we have a relatively recent good model to go by for this, which was the Great Recession of 2008-2009. That was formally that lasted 18 months, although certainly we have felt the pains of that long beyond just 18 months. The first thing we did was to look and see what happened to the Board of Water Supply's revenues during that time period. And so this chart is showing the years 2002 to 2015 along the bottom, and revenues in millions of dollars here. And so this dark line across the top is the Board of Water Supply's revenues during that period. We adjusted those revenues to take out the influence of rate increases. So we normalized them to take that out of the picture. The shaded area here is the 18-month recession. And the orange bars are the percent change in Hawaii gross domestic product. So you can see that the changes, the increases in Hawaii GDP decrease leading up to the recession period, and then there's actually a negative GDP at the tail end. So when we look at the Board of Water Supply's revenues during that period, they are really pretty flat, not much change. There is a decrease in those revenues a couple of years after. It's difficult to say whether that is a lag effect of the recession or whether that's a result of greater conservation efforts or sensitivities to compounded price increases from Board of Water Supply, ENV, or a multitude of those factors. But in the short story is we don't see a big drop in the Board of Water Supply's revenues directly related to the recession. So then we look at some other economic factors here, and let me walk you through this chart. This is the same period of 2002 to 2015. What are some of the other things that affect how the Board of Water Supply might make operating decisions or decisions about its capital project spending or financing? And one of those, of course, is the interest rate paid on bonds. And for that, we use the 10-year Treasury note as a barometer, and that's shown in the blue bars. So this is the interest rate on the 10-year Treasury note. This is 0%, 2%, 4%. So you can see that the interest rates are hovering around 4% for the few years leading up to the recession, and then they drop quite a bit, and then you see them staying flat as a result of the stimulus package by the federal government. So again, interest rates dropping as would be expected as borrowing decreases after a recession. The Honolulu Construction Cost Index is a measure of the cost to construct things. So as that's shown in the green bars, and basically it's percent change, again, going from 0 to 10% here. And so as the economy is heating up and more things are getting built, those construction costs are inflating. And then as the construction industry falls off, those prices, the changes decrease, and then when spending picks up again, then they go up as we would expect, and that gray line that's bouncing up and down, that's actually spending on government contracts here in Hawaii, and so you can see it going up substantially in about 2011 out through 2015, and that's all in government contract spending. So what does this tell us? What it says is that if you can time things to hit this sweet spot right here when the construction cost index is pretty low and interest rates are pretty low, that's a great time to build things. That's a great time to issue contracts. But it's very difficult to predict the timing of those types of events, and I always say if in fact we could, then probably none of us would be sitting here. We'd be doing something else. But it does point out that it pays to be prepared to take advantage of situations like that should they come along. They will come along again, and that means having a number of projects, capital projects, essentially shovel-ready that could move into construction on short notice when that situation arises again. The strategies to deal with economic downturns, things like accessing working capital and issuing debt. Again, these are short-term economic cycles that generally don't require long-term solutions. The conclusions from this trend analysis is that monitoring using the Water Master Plan scorecard and other available metrics is important to assess changing conditions. And as you saw from some of those charts, things can change quite rapidly. The financial tools available to the Board of Water Supply appear to be adequate. We talked about 5 of those. And that with an ongoing commitment to the Water Master Plan implementation and adherence to BWS's financial policies, high rate shock under any of these scenarios is not anticipated. Any questions?
I have a question. Dave, when you were looking at the water source contamination scenario, you mentioned that it was going to be 30 million capital and then 3 million annually for that scenario. What kind of treatment were you looking at, or did you consider
We
there?
didn't specify any particular level of treatment. It's a much more generic scenario than that, just trying to put some ballpark capital costs to things.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hearing none, well, thank you very much for the report.
Thank you, Dave. And Joe.
All right, next item we have is a financial update for the quarter ending December 31st, 2017. Chair recognizes Joe Cooper.
Good afternoon, Board. I'm here to give you the financial update for the second quarter of FY18, starting in July and ending in December. In general, our revenues were $128 million. That's about $10 million more than our budgeted revenues. Our operating costs were $84 million, or about $17 million less than our budgeted costs. And that results in our actual revenues being about $27 million over our budgeted cost, our budgeted net revenue of $17 million. If we drive down a little deeper into exactly some of the other costs involved, we can see that personnel cost was $4 million under budget at $19 million. Supplies and services was $10 million under budget at $13 million. Repairs and maintenance was $3 million under. Equipment was almost $2 million under, and utilities was basically on budget. These costs, although they're all below budget, they're not all below budget, except for utilities, they're below budget. They do pretty much reflect our actual costs from prior years. And the personnel issue, again, is our desire or our need to try to fill many of the vacancies that we have budgeted, but remain unfilled. Also not in this slide was we had, but will be discussed a little bit later, is our debt service of about $20 million for the 2 quarters. This shows a breakdown of our operating costs by percentage. And again, this is where you can see our fixed charges was about $26 million. That's down about 3% from last year. And this is where I want to point out our debt service at $20 million. Debt service is usually about the 4th expense on our pie chart, but it's much larger this quarter, or this 2 quarters actually, because we've been spending down or paying down some of our higher interest rate SRF loans. We paid over the last 2 years, we've paid down about $26 million in SRF loans, and been able to refinance those at a lower interest rate. And so in this quarter, we paid about $9 million in loans early. The other costs of personnel services and material and supplies are both around $18 or $19 million. And equipment is barely visible between debt service and material and supplies. This graph breaks down our different operating costs by compared to budget. Again, you can see the difference in personnel costs due to vacancies. Basically, fixed charges and debt service are pretty close to budget. Material services and supplies are somewhat under budget. Some of that is an artifact of the fact that we budget material services and supplies straight line across all 12 months, as opposed to when actually many of our service contracts are awarded, which are often later in the year. This breaks down our operating expenditures by month. And again, you can see that year to date, our operating expenditures are about 17% below budget. But except for July and August, or August and September, again, there are some spikes in our budget. A lot of that is timing differences. Again, some of that is due to paying off the mechanics of paying down our SRF debt. And finally, we have our operating revenues. Again, they're about 8% above budget. Most of that variance occurred in the 2 months of August and September, when we had some dry, hot weather and consumption, and therefore revenues was somewhat higher than budgeted. But most of the other budgeted revenues are pretty much in line. That concludes my financial presentation. Are there any questions or comments?
Just one, on the material, supplies, and services, we were under budget in that expenditure category. Is that just the awarding of contracts that were delayed, or?
I can't really say definitively whether it's just a timing issue, although I think it's a combination of both a timing issue in that many of our contracts are awarded later in the year as opposed to early in the year, and since the budget was straight-lined, those would not be factored in. And then also on materials and supplies, we kind of have, we budget for enough to take care of emergencies or contingencies that are unexpected, so that we can address those emergencies or contingencies right away. And so sometimes there is some variance in our budget on that area.
We are going to be looking a little closer for the FY19 budget at that category to try to project out, at least in the quarter, that we anticipate being able to complete the procurement to acquire the material, the supplies, and the services. Right now, it's sort of been divided by 12 and just uniformly applied across the whole year. But actually, in reality, the acquisition or the purchase occurs in a certain projected quarter, instead of dividing it by 12 and spreading it uniformly by 12 months, over a 12-month period.
And with a lot of the financial planning that Dave and I talked about earlier, as far as the budget goes, we are kind of in a continuous improvement process where over the last, I've been here 4 years, over the last 4 years, we have continuously tried to improve our budgeting process and allow for our the needs to serve our customers, as well as becoming, I guess, a tighter, more well-run organization. Any other questions? Comments?
Members, any further questions? Yeah.
I realize that the long-term financial plan has a certain life, and we'll get to decisions later. But when do we get the budget for next fiscal year?
It's actually being prepared internally, and we have a budget workshop, I think, scheduled for April or May, where we're going to present the draft budget to the board for board action, the May-June timeframe.
I believe we have a date of the.
A date on the,
We have the date, Chair, it
Yeah.
escapes my memory right now. But we do have a budget workshop scheduled already.
Yeah. Okay, members, any further questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you.
Next up is an enterprise organizational study update.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like Robert Morita, head of our Executive Support Office, to provide the report.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. So this is the update to the Enterprise Organization Study. This is about nearly 3 years in the making, I think, since we initiated this effort. This really started from the inquiries from a former board member, and we undertook a study with an organization, Matrix Consulting Group. They were awarded the contract to take a look at the Board of Water Supply, effectively to take a look at our overall organization and see how it matched up against utilities that could be considered peers, similar size, similar scope and effort to the Honolulu Board of Water Supply. And it was through this report, they worked with our organization. They went and held meetings, individual interviews with the majority, if not all, of our managers in the department. The plan looked at things like the organizational structure, span of control, staffing levels, training, et cetera. And through this effort, they came out with a report, and in the end, there were about 138 both comments as well as recommendations for the organization to look at. And on the slide here, you see some of the utilities that they did compare us with in terms of overall structure. It didn't do a deep dive into those organizations, but at least on the surface, we were compared to similar organizations, so Albuquerque, Austin, et cetera. The findings in the report, a lot of positive comments were made, and so some of the positive comments included things such as that the Board of Water Supply did adopt a strategic plan in 2014, adopted a 30-year master plan as well, that the capital projects were working on programs to enhance the delivery process to meet the 30-year plan, that we initiated the multi-skilled worker program to reduce costs and improve flexibility, completed a condition assessment study of pumping and chlorination facilities, that the organization maintains high credit ratings from both Fitch and Moody's, and that through a couple of surveys that were employee surveys that were part of the Matrix study, it came away with relatively high marks, high feedback from the employees regarding working relationships, supervision, attitudes toward work, and the overall impact to people's lives in terms of their jobs and the duties that they perform. On the areas that the Board of Water Supply could consider for improvement overall, enhancement of the training and development opportunities for employees. It responded to, or it commented on the challenges with respect to recruiting and the hiring of employees. And it's not only this department, but it's basically, from what I've seen anyway, it's a city and county effort as well, that issue that's being addressed. Encouraging employee engagement to proactively participate in identifying future challenges and opportunities for Board of Water Supply, and improving overall communication between managers, supervisors, and employees. As far as organizational recommendations, there were opportunities for improvements that were identified. Broadly speaking, developing better functional cohesion or groupings of similar functions and services, centralizing support services within the department, analyzing recruitment, retention, and succession planning to keep position vacancies at reasonable levels to achieve future goals, analyzing training requirements to ensure proficient and engaged workforce, and analyzing workflow, benchmarks, performance metrics to improve operations. So basically, leveraging the amount and all of the data that we're collecting in the organization organization to use it as either key performance indicators or just performance metrics for our organization to achieve. So we held discussions with the divisions after all of the results came in. And what we tried to do was get the 138 or so comments and recommendations into logical groupings. So all the divisions were invited to participate, and we, through the help of Systems Excellence, Glenn Hamamura helped walk us through, coach us through the process. There were a number of groupings created, and in the end, two groupings basically bubbled to the top. One was the creation of a facilities management group, and the other was to look at the consolidation of the developer review functions in the department. So under facilities management, it was noted that in our organization here at the Board of Water Supply, there are multiple operational units, but there is no specific coordinated functional responsibility for facilities. The placement of the functions are historically skill-based, workload-based, or other factors. So meaning things like our plant operations group has the electricians, so they handle all of the electrical things. Field operations has the trades and the trade skills, so they help us with some of the woodworking or carpentry types of operations. But that really isn't their core function. And in addition to these types of functions, we identified some key activities that are interspersed throughout the department. Things such as physical security, custodial services, what I mentioned, building repair and maintenance, including electrical and plumbing, maintenance of the base yards and the Beretania complex, things like our parking lots, access roads, elevators. And I put it in there only because it was funny, but then it's actually true, is that we have issues with chickens and feral cats, and recently at Honolulu we had a goat issue. So in addition to keeping the water flowing and running for our customers, we have to deal with issues like this. And right now there's no central division section that we have to sort of address these types of issues. So in the study itself, it recognized that there were some elements that could hopefully be looked at for consolidation. So things like I mentioned, grounds maintenance, even the automotive section could be considered, both with a short-term and a long-term strategy. So in the end, while there was a lot of interest, I think, from the divisions to pursue something like this, it is complicated. It's going to require reorganization. It's going to require a lot of consultations with the union. And so I think the thought was that we would consider doing a much smaller scale pilot to just test the feasibility of it and to ensure that we're on the right path. But also at the same time, what we don't want to do is jeopardize any of the big efforts that we have ongoing right now by throwing things like this facilities management idea into the mix. And so the big one right now is in our field operations division, where we're going through a large-scale reorganization of the division. And it's nearly 10 years, I think, in the making as far as getting that reorganization through, getting union concurrence. That's a big change to the organization. It's going to provide a lot more it's going to provide permanency, number one, by creating actual job classes for our employees to occupy. But we're at the tail end of the process, and really we don't want to do anything that could potentially jeopardize that. So I think once that process is completed, I think then we can consider moving into looking at something like a facilities management group. The next area that was considered and is basically what we call plans review. And it was noted by Matrix. And really, if you look at our organization on the surface, there are 3 different plan review sections within our department. They exist in water resources, the project review branch. We have a plans review section in capital projects, as well as the permits and infrastructure. That's part of our service engineering group in customer care. All of them, in theory, or actually in practice, they're looking at effectively the same set of plans, but it's the same set of plans that have evolved over time. And so you're talking with water resources, from the developer stage who's submitting initial plans for a large-scale subdivision development, something, say, like a Koa Ridge, that has a time horizon of like 10, possibly 20 years out. So we're looking at plans like that versus things like that go to our customer care section, which are plans that are effectively homes or just some of the infrastructure that are immediate, where the time horizon is much different. It's much shorter. The people are looking for like things to be reviewed or approved now or within a very short amount of time. Very different looks at the different sets of plans. And so, like I said, so on the surface, it sounds like, okay, you're looking at the same set of plans. Why not consolidate this group, and hopefully you achieve some economies of scale, reduce some redundancy. But in the end, it was learned that the perspectives are very different. Their functions are very different. What they need to focus on is not necessarily amenable to getting these types of economies of scale. So in the end, like I said, the decision was to not move at this time to consolidate these particular functions. Like I mentioned, the time frames, the time horizons are very different from each of these groups. What their focuses are on are very, very different as well. But what was, I think what did come out of it is that we see opportunities there for a lot better information sharing within the groups. Comments that come in at the very beginning of the project, of the plan review, we need to develop better ways of capturing that information to ensure that as those plans mature and go through our process, that they're easily retrievable, so that it's consistent throughout the process, and that we don't maybe give conflicting information along the way. So that was something I think that came up from the different meetings that we had with the different plan review sections. So in conclusion, though some of the recommendations are not yet actionable, the study and the work product that came out of it can be implemented on smaller scales. Maybe not so much these large-scale reorganizations, but there are a number of recommendations that are already in process, individually by the divisions, or in some cases they're looking at between divisions to see if smaller reorganizations can occur. The conclusion from Matrix is that Board of Water Supply here is, and the span of control is sound and similar in structure to several of the peers that were mentioned at the beginning. And that there's opportunities to take advantage of technology data, and performance metrics. And we know that that's the direction that this industry, as well as government in general, is moving towards, is to use a lot more technology and data gathering and data analytics to help ensure that we're delivering the right level of service. And that you'll probably see through the annual budget process some of these recommendations being put in, like I said, at a probably a smaller scale. It may not be clearly identified as a large-scale reorganization, but it provides resources, as the study anyway. It provides resources, and I think it provides some reassurance that that we're heading along in the right direction. I think, yep, that's it. Any questions?
So I have a question. So basically, things, because I'm pretty sure I can speak for the board, we're here to support in any way we can. So just let us know what you need exactly and we'll support. But at this time, it sounds like status quo.
It'll status quo in terms of with relation to the study and I think some of the bigger recommendations that it had. But I think you'll see, and Ray, you asked about the budget. I think you'll see some of the smaller things coming through in the budget. So it's not necessarily status quo. This organization is changing slowly over time. And sometimes whether we like it or not, we're changing. So
It's also a matter of how much capacity we have to absorb or carry out the changes. So we have to prioritize what's important and try to schedule it over time.
Step is the field operations reorganization plan?
That's correct, Chair. That's actually taking our multi-skilled worker program and making it a permanent part of the organization. It's been in a kind of experimental temporary mode for a number of years. So the reorganization, which both us and the union and our employees would like to see happen, is in process right now.
You'll also hear that referred to in the upcoming budget when we have the workshop with you.
Okay, I look forward to. Sure.
Showed up in the last report by Joe, but the shortage of employees or how critical is that? I know on the larger city scale, it's very critical. How critical is it at the Board of Water Supply?
It is actually very critical for us also. We are struggling to even go through the after effects of previous hiring freezes a number of years ago. But we've had also an aging workforce. So last year, I think we saw at least a dozen retirements across the organization. I have a service award ceremony coming up, and the list of employees is just a pretty long list of employees with 30 years service, 35 years, 45 years service, still working, but we know at some point they're going to retire. And our challenge of trying to find replacements, qualified replacement people, it's a big challenge. I've just during lunch had a retirement ceremony for somebody that retired after 30 years of service, an architect. The others around the table were talking about how difficult it is even from the private sector and the government sector to find professional engineers to fill our vacancies and our needs. And we know that we have a larger capital program coming up, so the need for more engineers and qualified inspectors to help deliver a larger program. It's going to be a challenge.
So is that going to affect how we deliver those programs?
We may have to look at different ways because the work needs to get out, how we're going to handle that. And that's why our Capital Projects Division has developed an implementation plan to help implement the larger capital program that's identified by the board in PL2 and in our long-term financial plan and long-term capital program. Really trying to work toward achieving that 21 miles of construction projects being awarded each year in about 10 years from now. It is a challenge. Ray, we don't have the answers yet. I know the city and also the state's struggling with it. One of the things we talked about during that retirement ceremony was how the benefits of working for a city or state government's been changed over time, like whether or not your medical would be covered for the employee 100% after 10 years. That's become like, after so many years, 50%, 25%, then 50%, then your spouse is no longer covered. So the erosion of some of those benefits has kind of eliminated some of the competitive edge government had in attracting people to come to work in government and public service, because the private sector, it's becoming like salaries which were very difficult to compete with the private sector, and also the federal sector.
Yeah,
I think that's why I bring it up. I think it all goes hand in hand, this organizational study. I think hopefully we can make us more competitive, more attractive as an organization. But I look forward to a more communication on this. Yeah.
Definitely during the budget process, we're going to have more discussion. We're going to need the board's support. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions on this topic? If not, I'm going to move on to the next item for information. Thank you for the report, Mr. Morita. We have the status update of groundwater levels at all index stations. Chair recognizes Barry Usugawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. There is one aquifer index well in low groundwater status for December of 2017. That is Honolulu. It's been in low groundwater status since June. That level is 17 feet. The water level is like 0.4 feet below that. So it's still in pretty good shape. The monthly production average for December was 130 million gallons per day, and that's right on the 5-year monthly average for December. The rainfall index in December was 102% on normal. The 5-month moving average for rainfall was 93%, so we've been having a fairly normal rainfall year. The National Weather Service is forecasting above normal rainfall for this winter and into spring, and that's due to a La Nina condition in the equatorial Pacific Ocean. Most monitoring wells, water levels in those wells are continuing to exhibit static head levels trends due to the decreased pumpage, the lower temperatures of the winter months. And that's my report.
Members, any questions? If not, thank you for the report. Moving on to the next item for information is the water main repair report. Chair recognizes Mike Fouquet.
Thank you, Chair Andaya, and the members of the board. During the month of December, we had 25 main breaks. The significant one I want to point out is that occurred on December 4th in Kalailoa. This was actually a 14-inch PVC pipe that's provided RO water to our customers in the Barbers Point area. It's significant for us because this break took us a while to fix because it's in a difficult location. And at that time, we didn't know that because if we're out long time, we may be impacting our power generation for HECO. So we learned from that and the urgency to get the RO line back up and running. So we don't want to impact power. Impacting water is one thing, but impacting power as well is not a good thing. So we learned from that and some of the things. The 14-inch is a very odd size for us. It's not a common thing, and also too because this is it's an RO line that was actually installed by the people across the street. The pipe didn't meet our standards, does not meet our standards. So there's some things that we got to work on that part. Aside from that, our leak detection people surveyed 18.3. The reason why the low quantity is because this is a time of the year when a lot of people are taking their extended, they got to burn the leaves and stuff, so they were out. We found 2 service clamp leaks that we repaired before it became a major problem. Okay, that's it. Any questions?
Members, any questions? If not, that concludes the items for information. May I have a motion? Thank you very much, everybody. Can I have a motion to go into executive session?